So recently, I was involved in a fairly complex project from a functionality standpoint as well as structurally, so front end, back end, and the database level. What I found is that we, as developers, oftentimes take things for granted. And one of the things that we take for granted is polymorphic relationships. Specifically, the application and the project that I was working on included Laravel on the back end as the driving force, as a building block for the APIs. And the kind of issue for me arose when I found out. I mean, it's not an issue, it's more like an observation. So it arose to me that oftentimes we use what is so called a polymorphic relationship in Laravel, which is a really handy functionality that enables us to kind of connect on a oftentimes many-to-many relationship uh, types that are not directly relatable, but can be. For example, in this image here, we have posts, videos, and if uh, if users are able to add some tags to posts, but as well as videos, the same ones. So the basic solution would be to have a taggables table, and then you have a post ID foreign key and a video ID foreign key, and then one of these will always be null, while the other one will not. And that can work, of course, but in the long run, what if we add I don't know, five more entities, and then that means five more foreign keys, each of them being mostly null other than one of them at a time uh, in the database, of course. And the guys over at Laravel, of course, were very clever, and they found this really cool solution called polymorphic relationships that basically do exactly as it's depicted in this image. So instead of having separate foreign keys for separate entities, what you have is a taggable ID and a taggable type, which allows you to have, I don't know, taggable ID can be, I don't know, a post ID one, and the type here would be a string post. And then, Laravel with its ORM would figure out, that a certain model is actually is actually a tagged post or a tagged video, so on and so forth. And that's all fine and dandy and that's all working. But what we oftentimes overlook is that by using polymorphic relationships, we are violating one of the principles of good database design, and that is utilizing the purpose of the database, and that is to enforce constraints on the data and to essentially prevent uh, spillage of data and similar things from happening. What I mean by that is that when you have a taggable ID and a taggable type, as I mean in this graph, in this ER diagram, whatever you want to call it, um, there is a link here. So taggable ID 1 to many posts, but also to many videos. That is true for the application layer, for Laravel. But database-wise, this here is just an integer column, and you can just basically go in and type in any ID, any number, and it doesn't have to relate to posts, it doesn't have to relate to videos. If you're familiar with, maybe you've watched some of my other videos, but if you're familiar with database design in principle, uh, constraints are present to prevent stuff like this. So if we were to opt for a more typical, let's call it solution, to have multiple columns, for example, post ID and then a video ID, and then we add constraints, that will work. And then you can just go in and type any number. It has to be offered here. It has to be one of the existing IDs from the post table. And that is the stuff that's preventing, random gibberish from being entered into the database. But when using the polymorphic relationships, you don't have that. What you flexibility, you gain speed as a developer, you get stuff done quicker, but it has a cost, it has a trade-off, and that is you are basically violating uh, some database principles like the constraints, and we're not actually utilizing what the database can do for us. Oftentimes, even in terms of validation. So, what levels of validation of data do we have? First off, we have on the front end validation, so users can't enter random stuff just like that. Also, we have validation on the back end, but also on the database level, the data itself has to have foreign keys, indexes, and other constraints that are in place and that uh, should prevent, uh, you know, unintentional entering of data, of inconsistent data, and so on and so forth. So, I mean, it's not like you shouldn't use polymorphic relationships. Also, it's not like Laravel is the only framework that utilizes them. There are other frameworks and technologies that use them, but probably, I mean, probably Laravel is the easiest one to implement. I've looked up other frameworks. They're pretty similar, but oftentimes more complex to implement um, this kind of stuff. Laravel is pretty straightforward, even if you don't know it, if you don't know PHP. I mean, the overall concept is pretty simple. Here it is, yeah. It's an assignable type, assignable ID, and then you have some sort of string here in combination with the ID. It determines what table are we going to. Are we going to the positions table, the group, or the user table? So that's the whole story of it. So when you're using these relationships, just think about whether you want to actually do this, because maybe in the future you will have, especially for large enterprise applications, maybe you will have some other non, for example, Laravel application connecting to your database, and they will probably not be able to read this off the bat, and you will have to build some kind of API, some kind of application logic. I don't know, for example, Java, C Sharp, .NET, whatever, Python, Flask, whatever it might be, to interpret this uh, correctly. On the other hand, it's not like it's the end of the world if you use this. Quite the opposite. Most of the times, it's pretty handy. But yeah, just keep in mind the pros and the cons of this approach.